US President Donald Trump eases sanctions on Belarus after it frees more than 100 political prisoners. Stiff European sanctions remain in place against the close Russian ally. So why has the deal been struck now? And what's the reaction in Russia, Ukraine and the EU? This is Inside Story. Hello, welcome to the programme. I'm Adrian Finighan. US President Donald Trump rarely keeps quiet about forging peace deals on the international stage, so perhaps nearly as remarkable as the one he's just struck with Belarus is the secrecy that came before it. President Alexander Lukashenko has freed more than 100 political prisoners. Trump, in return, is easing sanctions against Belarus on a key agricultural export. Many of those released and deported were in jail since protests against the results of elections in 2020. They say the vote was rigged by Lukashenko, who's been in power for 31 years, longer than any other European leader. His country has since faced severe Western sanctions and also for its close alliance with Russia. Although Belarusian forces have not fought in Ukraine, its territory is used by the Russian military. So, why has Trump cut this deal, and what might it signal to Russia, Ukraine and its European allies? In a few moments, we'll speak to our guests and the leader of Belarus's opposition. But first, a report from Imogen Kimber.
Belarusian Nobel Peace Prize winner Els Bialyatsky walks free after spending 4 years in prison. Opposition leader Maria Kolesnikova has also been released. They're two of more than 100 political prisoners freed in a deal brokered between the Trump administration and President Alexander Lukashenko. All go into exile, deported to countries including Lithuania and Ukraine. In exchange, the US has lifted more of the many sanctions in force against Belarus.
We, the United States, will be lifting the sanctions on potash. So there'll be more in the future. As we go down this road to normalization, there'll be more sanctions lifted.
During Lukashenko's 3 decades of rule, Belarus has been sanctioned by the EU and the US for human rights abuses, including a violent crackdown on protesters who said the 2020 presidential election was rigged. Belarus has also been sanctioned for its close relations with Russia and has allowed the Russian military to use its territory tactically in its war in Ukraine. But now the US says it's discussing Belarus's relationship with Russia with Lukashenko.
I talked to your president on different issues. He helps give us advice on what to do with the war between Russia and Ukraine. It's good advice.
Unnamed US officials told the Reuters news agency the deal was part of an effort to reduce Russian President Vladimir Putin's influence over Minsk. But the deal by the US has come as a surprise to many and is at odds with the EU, that does not recognise Alexander Lukashenko as the legitimate winner of the 2020 presidential election. Imogen Kimber, Al Jazeera for Inside Story.
Sviatlana Tsikhanouskaya is Belarus's opposition leader and political activist. She joins us now from Vilnius in Lithuania. Good to have you with us. What's your reaction to all of this? I mean, did you expect anything like this could happen, or did it come as a bolt from the blue?
Of course, we have been expecting new releases of people because we, together with our American partners, working on the release of Belarusian people from prisons. And of course, I'm so grateful to President Trump and John Cole and everyone who took on the humanitarian track of releasing political prisoners. These are our people, and the fact that US is working on their release is a shared achievement. Of course, it's a huge joy for us to see people who are free now, I know what it means for their families, because I remember when my own husband was released, it was their relief. And especially it was important for those who waited for years without phone calls, letters, or even proof that their loved ones were alive.
President Trump says that lifting the sanctions is a necessary price to pay to secure the release of political prisoners. But from where you sit, is freedom something that should ever be negotiated in this way? Does it risk rewarding repression?
Of course, repressions cannot be rewarded, but sanctions are a tool. And US sanctions introduced for human rights violations can be used as leverage to release people and stop repressions. The American sanction policy is rather flexible. Sanctions can be eased and reintroduced if the situation worsens, for example. Partial easing of US sanctions on potash might slightly simplify life for Lukashenko, but it is not decisive. What matters more is the fact itself, that Lukashenko releases people in exchange for sanctions relief. And this proves that sanctions do work. But it is very crucial to separate humanitarian and political tracks. Releasing people is a humanitarian track, and the US side is very explicit. They are acting to save lives. US sanctions are about people, European Union sanctions are about systematic changes, stopping the war, enabling democratic transition, and ensuring accountability. And these approaches do not contradict each other, they maybe complement each other.
But Sviatlana, what's to say that Lukashenko won't just refill the prisons once the media circus has moved on?
Absolutely, yes. And of course, American sides know about this. And our political track is that all the repressions have to be stopped, not just to look like revolving doors when some people are released, twice more are detained. So we are, with our American partners and European, we understand this very well. And that's why now President Trump is using relieving of sanctions as carrots. But in the case situation will not improve, sticks might be used as well.
This is all about what US officials have told the Reuters news agency is an attempt to pull Lukashenko from Putin's sphere of influence. What do you think of that? Do you think that's possible to do?
I think it's absolutely impossible to split Lukashenko and Putin. Their relationship, their friendship is symbiotic. They will always support each other and use each other. And of course, Lukashenko is serving to Putin's interest. It's impossible to split them. So Lukashenko is an untrusted person. He's a politician who seized power back in 2020 and is not recognized as president neither by European Union, neither USA.
But these people aren't free, are they? They've gone into exile. You're in exile. What message does this send, not just to Lukashenko, but to other authoritarian governments about how far they can go before political prisoners become bargaining chips?
Look, first of all, the fact that political prisoners are not allowed, to stay in Belarus, they don't have choice either to stay or to be exiled, means that Lukashenko is afraid of Belarusians. He's afraid that new bursts of energy will appear in Belarusian society. So that's why he thinks that if he will, kick out people of the country, people will stop fighting. But for 5 years, people are not giving up. And I'm sure that new releases will bring boost of energy to people, even if these people are abroad. Of course, we are against that people are used as bargaining chip, but now we are saving people's lives, people who were held in Communicado for many, many years. So we'll see how the situation will develop. But again, our final goal is to stop repressions and hold free and fair elections in Belarus. And I think that the USA, as one of our partners, will assist us in fulfilling this task as well.
Sviatlana, it's really good to talk to you on Inside Story. Many thanks indeed for being with us. Sviatlana Tsikhanouskaya. Let's bring in our panel of guests. From Vilnius, Lithuania, we're joined by Franak Viacorka, who's Chief of Staff for Sviatlana, who you just saw, and a non-resident fellow at the Atlantic Council. From Washington, D.C., we're joined by Mark Episkopos, a research fellow at Quincy Institute's Eurasia program. And from Moscow, we're joined by Andrey Kortunov, a Russian foreign affairs analyst. Welcome to you all. Let's start with you, Franak. The EU and the UK don't recognise Alexander Lukashenko as Belarus's legitimate president. By striking this deal, is President Trump effectively granting him international legitimacy? And if so, does that matter?
I don't think so. I don't think so, because Trump talking to everyone, and Trump was very explicitly that he is making deals with dictators, with authoritarian leaders. His style is very unique. It's very different from Europeans. If it will be Merz or Macron or Starmer to call Lukashenko a highly respected president, it will have a very different effect. But when President Trump is doing this, we understand his approach is pragmatic. It's transactional. He wants to achieve the deal. He wants to release people. He wants to achieve peace. So I don't think it will bring some legitimization of Lukashenko. Of course, it will give some points, some benefits, some possibilities to trade for Lukashenko, but it's not critical. European pressure is much more important, as President Tsikhanouskaya has mentioned.
Mark, picking up on what Franak was saying there about this being transactional, this obviously shows that Trump can get things done internationally. Critics, though, says it proves everything, including human rights being transactional. Which interpretation fits here better?
Well, I would say, Adrian, this administration has not prioritized democratization in the same way that previous administrations have gone about the issue of U.S. foreign policy and engaging these kinds of governments around the world. However, if we were to stick on the human rights issue for just one moment, I would say if you look at the track record of Belarus-West relations over the past decade or so, the record to me is abundantly clear. Periods of engagement and rapprochement between Belarus and the West have been accompanied by a relaxation in the civil rights situation in the country, whereas periods of maximum pressure, isolation, and punishment have been accompanied by the opposite. So to the extent that we, and certainly the Europeans, are very concerned about these issues, about what's going on domestically in the country, as well as the Belarusian opposition, this U.S.-Belarus track, this normalization track, is a very good thing, precisely because it allows Belarus to have a reasonable, respectful dialogue on these issues, on human rights issues, with the West, in a way that can lead to real improvement.
Andrey, what do you make of that? Is this deal really about Belarus at all? Is it a signal aimed squarely at the Kremlin about the benefits that cooperation with President Trump could bring?
I think that it might be also a signal to the Kremlin that there are not only sticks, but also some carrots for the Russian side as well. And I can imagine that there might be even a degree of jealousy in Moscow that Lukashenko was able to accomplish more than Russia. On the contrary, if we look at the most recent decisions on sanctions by President Trump, he imposed additional sanctions on Russia, including major Russian oil companies, Lukoil and Rosneft. But clearly, Russia and Belarus are in the same boat. So a victory for Lukashenko is also a victory for President Putin. And it is a kind of promise that maybe at some point, President Trump will go as far as to lift at least some sanctions imposed by his predecessor on the Russian Federation as well.
Franak, as I was saying to Sviatlana a few moments ago, these people are not free. They've gone into exile. Some of them into Ukraine, which is at war with Russia. I mean, what confidence should anyone have that any of the prisoners freed under this deal won't be retargeted or come under further political pressure and intimidation once pressure has gone, once the media circus has moved on? Are there any mechanisms to make sure that doesn't happen?
So these people are not staying in Belarus because such regimes, they don't want opponents, they don't want political leaders to challenge the dictator. So Lukashenko decided that all people released on American exchanges, they will go out, and I will never let them back. Because even being deported right now in Ukraine, Lithuania, Poland, they have criminal cases. And the moment they cross the border back to Belarus, they go to prison back to sit there, to stay for 5-10 years left for them in Belarusian prison chambers. So Lukashenko's regime made sure that there will not be any force, any power organization to challenge him in the future. Ukraine's role here is special this time. Yesterday, Ukraine surprisingly became the host country for political prisoners, because before prisoners exchanged badges, they were sent to Lithuania. But Lukashenko this time decided not to give anyone to European Union, and Ukraine agreed kindly to accept this 100 plus political prisoners. And it was personal decision of President Zelensky, who immediately called these released people and spoke with them about the situation. And it was like a signal of solidarity by Ukraine with Belarusian democratic forces. And I think even if there will be some rapprochement with the West, between Lukashenko and the West, Ukraine will never forgive Lukashenko, because Ukraine remembers how Lukashenko allowed Russian troops to start full-scale invasion against Ukraine in 2022.
Mark, I don't know whether you want to come back on that. The question I was going to put to you is that Trump has obviously bypassed his European allies completely on this. Is that a deliberate humiliation of his European allies, or simply Washington feeling that it needs to act alone because Europe has failed to make any progress on this?
Well, I'm sure it's deliberate. Whether or not it's a humiliation, I suppose, too, is up for interpretation. But it is deliberate, and the calculation is there has been, as you point out, no movement on the Belarus front for the past many years now. The initial reasons for the policy of maximum pressure, maximum isolation, if you look at their effects, have not gotten us any closer to our goals, whether it's fostering an improved human rights situation in Belarus, or imposing costs on Lukashenko in a way that would encourage him to change his behavior. None of that has panned out. And this administration, I think, very pragmatically looks at the situation and says, okay, it's time to change course. And it's doing this by a systematic, measured, and long-term normalization program with Belarus that spans the economic front, the diplomatic front, the political front, and there, I think, are even in the future could be some security components to it as well. And I think, as opposed to earlier iterations of these kinds of attempts, including in President Trump's first term, there is now a realism about what can and should be achieved. And it is no longer the modus operandi in the White House that Belarus must be somehow torn away from Russia and integrated into this discrete, separate Euro-Atlantic space at odds with Russia. There is now a thinking of, Belarus is a sovereign country. It has its own interests. It's pursuing a multi-vector foreign policy. It wants to have a good relationship with the West, but it also has been a partner, a close ally of Russia for many years. And we should arrange our strategy. We should pursue our Belarus policy in a way that respects and understands these concerns, as opposed to trying to overturn them in a way that has not yielded the results we want.
Okay, Andrey, I'll come to you in a moment, but first I want to throw that back to Franak and ask what you make of what you've just heard.
So I disagree that there is a change of policy. I think President Trump's administration is very clear. The goals are humanitarian. Understand that Lukashenko needs Americans much more than Americans need Lukashenko. And here they see the opportunity, because to stop Russian war against Ukraine is much more difficult. It's difficult for everyone. No one can do this. Only Trump achieved some success recently. But in case of Belarus, to achieve the release of people, to solve Belarusian crisis, it's much easier. And it's possible to touch these results already by released people. So I think that was the real goal, because no one, no Trump, no John Cole are speaking about economic opportunities and trade, etc. Now they speak only about humanitarian mission. And I'm really happy that American side and leadership, they distinguish contacts with Lukashenko and contacts with the society. The first phone call by John Cole after appointment was where? Not to Lukashenko, but to Sviatlana Tsikhanouskaya, who just spoke with you 10 minutes ago as the leader of Belarusian society and democratic leader. And American side, they convinced us that they will continue working with democratic opposition, same way as it was before. So the policy from their side doesn't change, but they have very clear mission in mind to release people first.
Andrey, getting back to the reaction in Russia, not from the Kremlin, but among the country's elite and the general public, could this somehow create pressure, given the war fatigue that there is in Russia right now, could it create pressure on the Kremlin to consider a deal over Ukraine? Or am I perhaps overestimating the symbolic impact of what's just happened in Belarus?
Well, pressure is probably not the word I would use here. I don't think that anyone can exercise pressure on President Putin, at least inside Russia. But I think that that sets a precedent that under certain circumstances, sanctions can be lifted or can be eased. And that might be an additional incentive to pursue negotiations with the United States and to look for a compromise on the Ukrainian settlement. It is yet too early to say that it will be an important factor, but definitely it's a signal which will not go unnoticed.
And Lukashenko has avoided sending Belarusian troops into Ukraine. Does this deal reinforce Lukashenko's instinct for strategic independence, or I mean, does it somehow pull him further into President Putin's orbit?
I think that Lukashenko always tried to pursue a kind of multi-vector foreign policy. He was deprived of this opportunity for a long time. He had no other options but to get closer to Moscow. But right now he might see an opportunity here, at least with the United States. And who knows, maybe the European position on Belarus might start eroding. The EU consensus might turn out to be more fragile than we think it is. So for him, I think it is definitely a chance that he doesn't want to miss.
All right, Mark, at a moment when Western unity over Ukraine is fragile, to say the least, does this kind of unilateral deal strengthen diplomacy or weaken collective pressure on authoritarian states?
I think it strengthens Trump's image as a deal maker, as someone who gets things done, and as someone who will talk to anyone and deal with anyone in order to get the results he wants. And I think that message is resonating in the Kremlin. But if you look at the broader kind of context here, when the White House looks across the Atlantic, what does it see? It sees a European Union and most major European states united in opposition to President Trump's peace plan, with deep skepticism over President Trump's peace plan. And then the White House also sees several countries that have supported President Trump's peace initiative completely and have worked to advance it. And one of those countries happens to be Belarus. And we know that over the summer, President Lukashenko acted as a back channel for discussions between the Kremlin and the White House about pathways for a potential settlement. And I'm not saying that this is the main driver or the decisive driver, but it is one of the reasons, one of the stepping stones of how we got to the Alaska summit between President Trump and President Putin. Okay. So I think the White House values this kind of role that Belarus can play.
Mark, I get that, but what message, what precedent does this set for other regimes who hold political prisoners? Iran, Venezuela, others. I mean, who must be watching this pretty closely to see if repression can somehow be turned into leverage like this.
Yes. The precedent would be that the White House already engages with countries around the world that don't fully share the liberal democratic catechism. And Belarus happens to be one of those countries. And to the extent that concrete diplomatic, economic, security, political objectives can be achieved through engagement with Belarus, it seems to me the White House conclusion is the benefits outweigh the potential costs and risks. So the human rights situation I think, is tied to finding a format for sustained long-term engagement between Belarus and the West. And when I say the West, I don't just mean the United States. I also mean the Europeans. But the way to advance this kind of dialogue is not through doubling down on a policy of maximum pressure and isolation, which simply hasn't worked, but to do exactly what President Trump is doing, which is pursuing an entirely different, more diplomacy-friendly approach.
Okay, Franak, I'll come back to you for a final word in just a moment. But Andrey, do you want to pick up on what Mark was just saying there from a Russian perspective?
Well, I would agree with this interpretation of the U.S. Foreign policy, and definitely it creates opportunities for many countries which do not belong to the liberal camp. It's not just about Belarus. It's not just about Russia. We can talk about North Korea. We can talk about China. We can talk about the Islamic Republic of Iran. I think right now they all analyze the decision made in the White House, and they think about how this decision can be applied to their relations with the Trump administration. Definitely, it's a very clear departure from the old Biden approach. It's a clear departure from rather old U.S. tradition of promoting liberal values in countries which do not belong to the liberal camp. And I think symbolically it is a gesture which is very important.
Franak, let's say we're looking back 6 months from now. What would tell us that President Trump's move has paid off, that it was a success, and what would tell us that the gamble hasn't paid off?
Our goal as democratic forces is to keep interest in Trump's administration and White House to Belarus, because we spent so much efforts to create this interest, and we showed that the success of President Trump is possible in Belarus. And we hope that in 3-6 months, all political prisoners will be released and repressions will stop. This is our first step. And later on, we can start the process of reconciliation, democratic transition. And we hope that the United States and Trump's administration will help us with that. And we hope that this idea that Belarus must be sovereign, independent, but also democratic, where human rights respected, it will be also on Trump's agenda. And we are sure that European allies, they are also interested in having independent and democratic Belarus. And at some point, there will be reconciliation of positions as well.
And there we must end it. Gentlemen, many thanks indeed for being with us. Franak, Viacorka, Mark Episkopos and Andrey Kortunov. Thanks for watching. You can see the programme again at any time by going to the website at aljazeera.com. For further discussion, join us at our Facebook page. You'll find that at facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. And of course, you can always join the conversation on X. Our handle there at AJ Inside Story. From me, Adrian Finighan, and the team here in Doha. Thanks for watching. We'll see you again. Bye for now.